The United States is out of Afghanistan, but the country's strategic location and vast resources remain. So who stands to benefit from the American exit? What does it mean for regional security? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. As planned, the American military occupation of Afghanistan is coming to an end. The pullout has been criticized as a major defeat. But was the 20-year war a complete failure? Well, for years, America's military presence gave it an advantage over rivals in the region. It also allowed civil and military contractors to make millions of dollars. And the long war opened a window for mineral exploitation, estimated to be worth billions. So if the war was so lucrative, could we see another one? Moscow and Beijing do not seem alarmed by the Taliban's takeover, and they've already shown interest in supporting the future of Afghanistan.
China encourages the Afghan Taliban to pursue moderate and steady religious policies, establish an open and inclusive political structure with the other parties, adopt peaceful and friendly foreign policies, especially towards its neighbors, so as to realize the reconstruction and development of Afghanistan.
The Taliban controls almost all the territory of the country, including the capital. These are realities, and it's from these realities that one must proceed, preventing the collapse of the Afghan state.
We'll begin our discussion in a moment, but first let's take a look at what's at stake for the region. The security environment in Afghanistan is still precarious. China, India and the US have voiced concerns about the Taliban harboring armed groups. The Taliban says it will not. It's estimated Afghanistan has billions of dollars worth of natural resources, and dozens of countries, including rivals India and Pakistan, are looking to benefit by helping Afghans extract them. With the prospects of a new government, political influence in Afghanistan is up for grabs. China is seeking to secure its Belt and Road initiative, and Afghanistan's support would be essential for its corridor with Pakistan. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by our guests. We have joining us from Miami, Teufel Dreyer, a professor at the University of Miami and a specialist on Asia's economy and security. She's also written extensively on mineral mining. In Doha, Hashmat Moslih, an independent Afghan analyst. Hashmat has covered Afghanistan extensively and is one of the first journalists to have interviewed the Taliban after 9/11. Good to have you with us. Let's start, if we can, with Hashmat then. For the last 20 years, Afghanistan has been a centre for US power throughout Central Asia. How much of a radical change in the balance of power takes place right now?
Well, we have to look at the US withdrawal of Afghanistan in the light of the wider security concerns of the US regionally and globally. The US government has learned that when you destroy a nationalist Islamic movement like that of the Taliban, as they did similar groups in Iraq, that the remnants or the leftover fighters will go on and join the Islamic State, and they will pose a much more potent threat to the US interests in the region. Overall, the threat of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State is seen by the US security analysts as a persistent condition and not as an existential threat to the US strategic interests in the region and globally. Also, the Islamic State has been engaged in Africa and the deserts of Syria, and they are basically contained there. The US would like to keep the fighting confined to those areas. And the main issue for the US at the moment is the reemergence of long-term strategic competition from Russia and China. And for that reason, the US does not want to be bogged down in the streets of Afghanistan trying to keep peace and security. And they would like to hand that over to their regional allies, namely Pakistan. And Pakistan has very close relations with Taliban. And Pakistanis will subcontract that US interest to the Taliban, and the Taliban will go on to subcontract that to the local commanders and the tribal elders, who will then subcontract that to the individuals with the currency of religion. But the currency of religion is not going to get them far in their fight against the threat of Islamic State. The Taliban would soon need some dollars. If the Afghan economy collapses under the Taliban, because the US does not want to help or the international community does not want to help, the Taliban will not use their limited resources to fight the ISIS. In effect, the ISIS has become an asset for the Taliban, a resource for the Taliban and the regional governments.
All right, that's an interesting way of looking at it. June, will the US then continue to exert some influence, do you think, in Afghanistan, especially through economic factors, the supply of dollars and Afghanistan's foreign reserves?
I think there are excellent arguments, as Hannah has suggested, for the U.S. supplying some dollars to the Afghan economy. As a matter of fact, today's Financial Times has a very interesting article by someone who says that the failure of the United States in Afghanistan was a failure to support economic construction in Afghanistan after the United States invaded. And I'm not an expert on Afghanistan, but I do watch what the US government was doing. And it was trying very hard to create infrastructure in Afghanistan. The problem being that whenever they would build something like a power station, the Taliban would come and blow it up. And unfortunately, despite the good arguments for the United States remaining in some kind of supportive role, if only to mitigate the influence of China or Russia, the public opinion in the United States is going to be dead set against doing that. So, and public opinion in the United States now feels very let down by not only the Biden administration, but the State Department and the intelligence community for not warning them that this is coming. So I think it would be a very hard sell to get bills aiding Afghanistan, the Taliban government, through Congress at this point.
All right, June mentioned there, Hashmat, the influence of perhaps Russia and China, or the US concern over that. Judging by statements we've heard, at least so far, from Russian officials, do you think Moscow believes it can reach an understanding with the Taliban which would help it to project its power after the US withdrawal?
Yes, I just want to say one thing first, that I'm not aware of Taliban attacking power stations and destroying power stations or dams. The Taliban did attack power lines, but they did not attack the main infrastructure of the dams. The failure of the US policy in Afghanistan in terms of economy was mainly due to its following a market economy model and not a mixed economy like the Europeans did after Second World War, where the government would run parts of the essential parts of the economy. And as for support of Russia for Taliban, the Russians are more pragmatic, less ideological when it comes to their foreign policy towards Afghanistan, at least now after the Soviet collapsed.
Do you think that they're seeing an opportunity then, Hashmat?
Absolutely. The Russians do see an opportunity in Afghanistan, especially if they want to keep security and order in their southern border through the independent countries of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. Also, China does not want Afghanistan to become a hub for Islamic State, from which they could recruit Uyghur of China and create trouble for the Chinese government. So the fact that ISIS is in Afghanistan is a double-edged sword for the Taliban, and it remains to see how they're going to play this card.
All right, you've opened up a lot of things. Let's take them apart now. June, starting with the influence of China or the opportunity for China, do you think Beijing sees an opportunity for its influence to grow in Afghanistan post the US withdrawal and the Taliban rise, particularly for some of its economic interests there?
Well, China definitely sees an opportunity, but China also sees a lot of risks. And as Hashmat had said, there is a good relationship between the Taliban and elements in Pakistan, not necessarily the Pakistani government, but the Chinese are also very wary of what is going on in Pakistan. Just a couple of days ago, several of their nationals were killed in a raid on the China-Pakistan economic corridor that goes through Gwadar and also through Baluchi territory. And the Baluchi are not very happy with this corridor, and there would be more of that. And you know, we keep talking here about the Taliban government, the Taliban government, the Taliban government, and clearly they're going to be in charge in Kabul, but that doesn't mean they're in charge of the rest of Afghanistan. And there are a lot of other ethnic groups who are not especially happy with the Taliban. And there are reports, and you know, Hamid, you're there, I'm not. I defer to your greater knowledge, but according to today's papers, the Taliban are engaged in battles with resistance forces in northern Afghanistan. And I don't think those people are going to give up and go away very easily. So we have to contend with to what extent is the Taliban going to be in charge of all of Afghanistan, and what can be done if China goes in and says, yes, here are billions, we'll help. And China has also become more wary, I think, of how much good its billions are doing, because it has been burned in places like Sri Lanka. The Malaysian government has been unhappy. There are concerns with dams in Peru that don't behave the way they should, and so on. So I don't think China is going to play Santa Claus very easily in Afghanistan, especially since conditions there are apt to be troubled for a long time to come.
But do you think, actually, you've opened up another issue, and Hashmat knows the north of Afghanistan very well. So let's take this point to him. And Hashmat, talking about some of the key figures in the Panjshir Valley in the north, do you think we'll see international or regional backing emerge for people like Ahmad Massoud, the son of the famous Afghan commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, or the former vice president Amrullah Saleh, who's now declaring himself to be the rightful acting president of Afghanistan?
Okay, so there are two issues here, and the issue of China, I will leave that and I'd like to come back to that. But the issue of resistance in Panjshir Valley against the Taliban, it's a very, very complex and interesting and future-making conflicts that is emerging in Panjshir Valley. The Taliban need international recognition. They want a peaceful transfer of power from the old government to the Taliban so that they can claim international legitimacy, so that they can stop any resistance against them as being a legitimate resistance. So therefore, the card is now with Panjshir Valley and the former Vice President Amrullah Saleh and the resistance forces rallying around Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud. They are negotiating with the Taliban to concede power in exchange for certain policy changes on the side of the Taliban and power sharing with the Taliban, and also bringing in other ethnic groups around the Taliban. But let's not forget, the major victory of the Taliban has been that they broke through the ethnic line in the last 3-4 years. And that's due to endemic corruption within that government of Ashraf Ghani, where the villagers, where they used to consist the backbone of resistance against Taliban, the people shifted towards the Taliban, stopped fighting. And they stopped supporting the National Army. They stopped supporting local commanders like General Atta, like General Dostum, and the other commanders or Ismail Khan in the West. These commanders were so much into the government. They had a foot in the government. They had a foot outside of the government. They lost touch with their people, with their local base. And when it mattered, they didn't have that local base. People moved towards the Taliban. If this was an election, it would have been a landslide towards the Taliban. This time around, if you notice, the Taliban managed to capture northern cities before they captured southern cities. And we know that the Taliban are predominantly Pashtun. So the Taliban broke through the ethnic line, and now the situation that we have on our hands
is that Hashmat, is there a lot of cards for foreign powers to play in the north of Afghanistan? Would the US, I know that Ahmad Massoud has been calling for US support. Would there be a US appetite for that? Would the Russians allow some of their former Soviet states to return to the sort of arrangement in the 90s where you saw Tajik or Uzbek backing for powerful ethnic figures to destabilize the Taliban grip on power? And the Taliban, well, they allowed groups opposed to the governments in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan to operate from Afghan territory. Can we expect that kind of calculus to re-emerge?
I think the U.S. and first of all, the U.S. realizes that a collapsed or a failed state of Afghanistan under the Taliban and continued war is not in their interest. I am sure that the Pakistanis have managed to convince the Americans that is not in their best interest. The Russians are absolutely terrified of continued war in Afghanistan because it will spill over into Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Because remember, the Taliban condition is with the US and others that you help us, we help you. If the Taliban are not helped, then the Taliban cannot be held responsible for groups emerging and going across and causing security concerns for Russia. So I don't see any of those states willing to give the resistance inside Afghanistan any military support. But the biggest support they could give is that to tell the Taliban, we will not recognize you, we will not hand over United Nations seat to you, we will not have economic relations with you unless you reach a settlement with the Northern Alliance or the fighters are gathering around the former government, which is Amrullah Saleh at the moment, which is technically he's the vice president and he holds that position at the moment. So this is the best card. And the Taliban, I think they know that. They do not want to take over power by force and then allow a situation of reality on the ground politics that some state would recognize the Taliban and some would not. And also the Taliban do not want to repeat the mistakes of Hamid Karzai's government, where they said that the Taliban are defeated. They did not bring the Taliban into the formation of a new government. Taliban went on to create a new resistance, and they bounced back to where they are now. It's quite possible that over a long time, if the Taliban are not recognized and they continue to control Afghanistan, and the northern fighters or the fighters under the guise of the former government continue to fight, Afghanistan will only become unstable, insecure. I don't see that the fighters in the north have enough manpower to take over all of Afghanistan.
It doesn't sound like, from what we're hearing from, I guess, that most of the global and regional powers want that right now. It sounds like they all see an interest in keeping Afghanistan stable, even if it is under Taliban control. June, even if that's the case, the US continues, of course, to freeze Afghan assets. There will be a lack of dollars flowing into Afghanistan, the sort of arrangement which the former Afghan government had of dollars coming in from the US to pay salaries. That's all going to come to bear very soon, right, June? That's going to bite the Afghan economy very soon.
I suspect there are negotiations going on even now about what to do about those assets, and that I also suspect that the United States government, and let's be very careful here. You know, we keep talking about the United States, United States, United States. The mood in the United States now is get the heck out of Afghanistan and leave it to its own devices. And it is going to be very, very difficult, no matter how wise people in the Biden administration have ideas for, yes, it would be in the best interest for the United States to help stabilize. They're going to have to overcome severe domestic resistance. And I don't see the path forward for the Taliban stabilizing the country to be that easy. This morning, I saw a video made by Atta Mohammed Noor, who is a Tajik warlord who fled to Afghanistan when I think it was Mazar-e-Sharif fell.
He fled to
Pardon me for
Uzbekistan.
mispronouncing these words. And he is saying, we'll fight, our resistance will continue. And then he says, only if we're dealt into the power equation, are we willing to play ball with the Taliban? And he said, we won't become slaves to these outsiders. And I loved his phrase, we will not go to others' tables for decoration. We want to be a partner in power. So I don't see the Taliban being able to stabilize the country that easily. And until the United States is convinced that there is a stable government there, it's going to be very reluctant to unfreeze those assets.
Hashmat, perhaps we should talk about Pakistan as well. Are they perhaps one of the biggest regional winners from the change of power in Kabul, right?
Absolutely. And let's also not forget that it is not only America that has security concerns. The Gulf region also has security concerns. Iran has security concerns. India has security concerns. And those regional powers do not want the Taliban to collapse. And I'm sure that some type of cash injection into the Taliban government with some type of agreement just to keep them afloat for the near future will happen. And I think it would be a responsible thing
including
for these
India. It was
make...
interesting, Hashmat, you put India in that group. Judging by the tone, at least in Indian media, they seem very keen on the idea of supporting and the legitimacy of Amrullah Saleh and supporting Ahmad Masood.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be a balancing act. Some will support the Taliban and make the Taliban dependent on their dollars, and so therefore Taliban have to listen to them. And India will support the Ahmad Shah Massoud's son and the commanders in the north to make them dependent on its policies. So it will be a proxy negotiations, keeping the security of the region in the image of those nations in mind. And that will continue. But if one side allows the other side to take the better of the other one, like, for example, if the northern fighters collapse, then India has utterly lost. America lost its bargaining chip, and other potential governments in the region that would like to see the Taliban more tamed would have lost their bargaining chip. So now the fighters in Panjshir Valley, which is, by the way, is a very strategic valley, although it's very small, is cut off from the rest of Afghanistan. I've been there during the time of the resistance against the Taliban. But it has a very strong strategic depth, and it sits right over the capital, Kabul. They can come back. But I think the leaders in the north and the former government are banking on this dissatisfaction of the people by keeping this economic stronghold over the Taliban and therefore making the people economically suffer and then getting them to turn against the Taliban. It's the old game of getting the people against the government. I think it's not a wise policy.
June, from an economic perspective, Hashmat was saying there will be some regional powers, Pakistan, Iran, that will want to see the Taliban administration at least survive. Can anyone fill the void? I mean, you look at some of the numbers, frankly. The international aid accounted for around 75% of Afghanistan's budget and 43% of its GDP. Can anyone fill that void, whether it's China or Pakistan or Iran?
Honestly, I think Afghanistan is in for a long period of instability. And I think international aid agencies are going to try to meet the basic needs of people for food and shelter. But beyond that, I don't see great generosity emanating, given the instability of the country. Now, if the Taliban can stabilize the country, that's another issue. That's another ballgame. But I don't see that happening in the near future.
All right, we've got a final 30 seconds, I think. We'll give it to Hashmat.
I think that according to World Bank, 60% of Afghanistan's economy is rural dependent on agriculture. And so 60% of the economy at the grassroots level will just survive. But what will collapse, what will suffer is the government apparatus, the teachers, the security forces and all that.
All right, it's been good to get your thoughts on this. Let's thank our guests very much. June, Teufel Dreyer and Hashmat Moslih. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.